It is a crossover edition of the Locked On Big 12 podcast and the Locked On Baylor podcast. I am Josh Neighbors, the host of Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll is here, the host of Locked On Baylor, Locked On Bears? I'm always so bad at this.
It's Locked On Baylor. Those Chicago guys took some copyright stuff, and I don't know.
I'm always worried. I never know what to say. So Locked On Baylor. Today we're going to look back on the season kind of in review for the Baylor Bears, discuss what went wrong. There were some things that went right, and what's going to happen moving forward for Baylor as the Big 12 kicks off next year.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover. Make sure you guys subscribe to both on YouTube, especially Locked On Big 12. We're trying to get to 3K subscribers by the end of the month. So 4 more days. We're almost at 3K. We're less than 40 away. So please subscribe. Also, guys, subscribe to Locked On Baylor. You guys find us both on Twitter. I'm at Josh Neighbors _ Drake is at Drake C. Toll. So Drake, Baylor picked to win the league this year.
Yeah.
Did not.
No,
they did not do that. 6-7, the final record. Give me like 30 seconds on like just the Baylor season in a nutshell, like a paragraph almost.
Disaster is a good word to start with. You are preseason top 10 pick to win the Big 12, and you go 6-6. Not only do you go 6-6, but like the biggest blue ball in Baylor football history is 6-3. And you have a shot at a Big 12 championship. Go back to the Sugar Bowl. This season, the 3 losses don't matter. You can still turn the ship around. You lose your last 4, including a 30-15 beat down to Air Force. It was pretty devastating to Baylor fans who thought this was going to be the Baylor team, barring a crazy injury. Josh, there were no crazy injuries. This team just ended up being bad. And Dave Aranda put it great at his last press conference. This was a fitting way to end a disappointing season.
So I think we have to teleport ourselves back in time to the start of the year. Because look, I was as low as I was on Baylor. They were a lot worse than I thought they would be. With that being said, I think we were too high on this group for a couple reasons. Number one, they lost a lot. Like they really lost a lot off last year's team. I know how important the lines of scrimmage are, and a lot of people were correct in assuming, because that is where a lot of football games are won, right?
Yeah.
That is still where a lot of games are won, and Baylor retained a lot there. But we're seeing these guys on Sundays, Jalen Petrie, right? Tyquan Thornton, Terrell Bernard, and then you got guys even like Abram Smith. Treston Ebner has played a lot for the Bears as well.
Yeah.
These are all guys who are like, decent to serviceable to whatever, NFL players, which means they were very good college players. And as good as Baylor has gotten with some of the speed on the outside, some of the running backs they have, as good as they were in the line of scrimmage, they also had a new quarterback coming in. I know we saw a little bit of, but not enough, I think, to sell us in the way a lot of people were sold. And I think we're going to see this next year too. I think TCU is going to get a lot of hype preseason. I think Kansas State will get a lot of hype preseason. And we saw it happen this year with both Oklahoma State and Baylor, and we saw what happened. So maybe it was a preseason buzz. I think the expectations were too high. I'm still with you on this being a disappointment. So I think both can be true. Like, I think the expectations were high, and I think also were too high, and this was also a disappointment. But I know Baylor fans feel differently because it felt like Shapen was supposed to take the offense to the next level, and that's the number one thing I feel like. Am I wrong here? That just didn't happen.
Yeah, that was, look, the most popular guy in town is a backup quarterback on almost every team, unless you have a Heisman caliber quarterback taking snaps. And so the most popular guy in town all season was Kyron Drones, we want Kyron, because Baylor fans were looking for one piece of the puzzle to blame. What could we fit in here that's going to change everything this year? And this little thing is tweaked, and Baylor's going to win their 10 games that we were promised preseason. And everyone kind of turned to Blake Shapen. I was on the Blake Shapen train pretty firmly until week 12, really, or the 12th game, I should say. I was ready for him to take the next step and at some point evolve. You saw the Iowa State game, he played really well. Texas Tech, he played really well. He started to fit this role of Gary Bohannon, which was be the game manager, don't turn the ball over, just be safe, and let's go win the football game by the ground and pound. The Oklahoma game was the same way. And then by the end of the year, that Kansas State game was a disaster. Just terrible. Like, couldn't have been a worse football game for a Baylor team that thought they could win it and go to the Big 12 title. And then you get all the way to the Texas game where I thought he was even worse. And then Air Force, like the guy couldn't win for losing. In his last 4 games, 3 of them were just awful. And Baylor fans took a look at that, and they were ruthless to him. And now Baylor only has 1 scholarship quarterback, and his name is Blake Shapen. And I think a lot of fans are pretty wary of that. This doesn't feel remotely close to the stability that Aranda had in his first offseason or his second offseason. That's a scary thought for a lot of Baylor fans, and I think it starts with the quarterback.
Yeah, so let's stick there. We have to stick there. I think we have to be careful with how fast we get on these guys, right? Because this year is a really good example of this, and I've said this a bunch. I'll say it again here. But Max Duggan, I did not think was great. I actually thought like Chandler Morris was probably the right call.
Yeah.
At the start of the year, just because if we're talking about short and intermediate passing game, like it looked like he was a little better at that than Max Duggan was. Max got a lot better at that, right? And Max was a lot of all or nothing most of the time, and he changed that. Will Howard, my God. I mean, if you watched him play the first couple of years, it was rough, really rough. So much so that people had talked about, hey, maybe should he be playing tight end?
Yeah.
And I think we have to be careful with that because we notice like with time, these guys can get really good. Spencer Sanders is a great example of this. I mean, I thought Spencer Sanders at his peak abilities this year, it was basically a one-man show, but he was he could win them. He could single-handedly win them basically any game in this league when he was fully healthy. And that team was not that good, in my opinion. And I think that showed growth there. And like, that's why I'm wondering, people are worried about obviously they're concerned about the quarterback situation, but I want to get your thoughts on this idea of maybe we have to wait. And look, I'm not saying he played well enough. I'm not saying that's not what I'm trying to say, but my point is like, this was his first full year as a starting quarterback.
Yeah.
And really all the hype last year was based off of one half in the Big 12 championship game. And that was never enough for me. And I'm not saying I've turned the corner completely on him. He's going to be good, but like the guy has ability and he needs to get better and improve, but he's going to have another full offseason, second full offseason as a starter. And look, sometimes guys take 2 or 3 of those. Like not everybody is going to be a 5-star guy who's going to be able to like, you know what? I've got one bad year in my belt. I'm a different player all of a sudden. It just doesn't happen for most 18, 19, 20-year-old kids.
Yeah, I don't have a coin next to me, but I have a retainer. I'm going to go because I'm at my childhood home. I'm going to go. There's 2 sides to the retainer here, Josh. And the one side, which I have been on more often than not, is give the kid time because he's a kid. This is his first full season as a starter. His offensive line was great, and you can make the excuse of, okay, why did he misuse such a great offensive line? Well, his receivers weren't great. He had a lot of injuries. That receiver room was so inexperienced that somebody said it to me within the staff that he is learning every week with the receivers. This isn't a receiving core that he can lean on whatsoever. He's got to go out there and make big plays because his receivers are so inexperienced. They're going to drop a lot of balls, miss routes, and it's making it even tougher on Blake Shapen. So there's that it's twofold in that, yeah, there are a lot of things this year that stacked against Blake Shapen in year 1 that made things extra tough on him. I think the running back room could be another one. You look at the first couple of games, Baylor didn't know who the running back was. Who's going to be the guy? If Blake Shapen's not throwing the ball well, who's going to run the ball well? And again, that all added up into a pressure for a young kid who's in his first year. Now, on the other side, as many good quarterbacks as you've mentioned, from Will Howard to Max Duggan, who I thought were bad, really, really bad, who in 3 or 4 years developed into elite caliber quarterbacks, maybe Blake Shapen's that guy. But then I give you Donovan Smith and say, here's a kid that I thought really young was like, all right, give him a couple years. He could be really good. And now what?
I haven't given up on him yet either, which is funny because
you haven't given up on Donovan Smith?
Yeah, no, God, no. Oh my God, no. I'm not giving up on that guy. Was he supposed to be he's not the type of player who should be in an offense with throwing the ball 50 times a game. That's what Tech does.
He should.
That's not a good fit. It's not a good fit. It's not a good fit at all. And look, we'll get a chance to see him in the Big 12 with Houston next year, right? He's got a chance. But like, this, I would say the same thing too, and this is the most extreme case. Hunter Deckers, like I think there is no doubt. Well, you could maybe say whatever was happening with West Virginia's quarterback situation, but like for a guy that we saw for the full season, Hunter Dekkers was the worst. He was by far the worst quarterback that we saw wire to wire this year. But like, as bad as it was, if you're Iowa State, you don't get a ton of guys, and then they have a new kid going in, Cole, whatever his name was, I think it's something like that. Yeah. It's coming in, it's supposed to be pretty good, but like, you can't just give up on these kids because like it's not the pros, you know what I mean? Because and I know that we only get these kids for so long, right? You only get them for 3-4 years. The transfer portal is there, and so there's so much now. There's so much desire to turn it around quickly, to make a change, to do something different, and I think the reality of the situation is like you're more often than not, you are better off sticking with that guy. Like Iowa withstanding, more often than not, you are better off, you're better off sticking with the guy that you have. Unless like if it hits a certain point of critical mass, then sure, you have to get rid of him. I get it. But I think the receiver point you make, that's a good one. I've been echoing that the entire year. Like, look, like I think this group together has a chance to be a really good group. But, and I know everybody doesn't want to hear this, but like sometimes maybe you just have to be the developmental program. The thing about Baylor is, and the fans know this too, like it's a lot of peaks and valleys. Now, it's not all because of like the way the school is. A lot of it's been coaching turnover, right?
Right.
And some of the stuff that's happened with obviously the Art Briles. But I mean, it was, it's been, Art Briles and then down had the Jim Grobe experience, right? To kind of stable the ship, and then to Matt Rule. They lose Matt Rule. It's down with Dave Aranda. It's back up with Dave Aranda. And now it's back to 6-6, which is not like all the way down. But like Baylor, because of the money they have, because of where they are, has the ability to reach those high heights, and it almost like it resets expectations every single time we go through one of these high-low cycles, I feel like.
Well, you know what happens to a starving person? If you give a starving person just a little bit of food, they want a whole lot more right now. Right. Baylor fans don't know what it's like to win until the last decade of football. And now they've gotten little glimpses into it. It's this idea of, all right, well, let's just do that every year then. If it's that easy, if Dave Aranda can do it in year 2 and have the best, like, Dave Aranda in 3 seasons has 2 below 500 and 1 the greatest single year in school history. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but Baylor fans, they want some sort of consistency because there have been so many peaks and valleys. But when you're the small private school down in Waco, and TCU you can argue it has pretty much the same point in the Big 12, it's going to be such a roller coaster of year in and year out. Are you an older team this year? How does your schedule favor? You saw the Baylor schedule. They go on the road to basically everybody. And any of the big teams, that did not favor the Bears whatsoever this season. So things like that are going to factor into why this team went 6-6. But again, Baylor fans, those starving people, have gotten a little bit of food and they want so much more. So look, I'm with you. These are the points that I was making till week 12. I felt like Blake Shapen, the one thing that kind of troubles me looking forward into the future is he didn't really get better. He got worse. That's the thing that is where I'm like, oh, you at least bring in a transfer quarterback that can compete for the job. I don't need somebody else to start next year. I don't, but I need somebody to make Blake Shapen's seat feel a little warm so that he steps it up and has some pressure on his spot and then fulfills that and gets comfortable.
So I will say this, they're in pretty good shape with running backs, right? I mean, I'm not sure, not any of them in the portal to my knowledge, right?
No, man.
And I believe they all have eligibility, if I'm correct. So it's going to be obviously Richard Reese, who is fantastic in his freshman season. Craig Squirrel Williams is back. And then Quaylon Jones, right? And these are all guys who had essentially 100 carry seasons. And that's pretty awesome. They had 3 guys like that. I know the offensive line's going to go through some transition, but it's nice that you've got 3 separate guys that at least, no matter who's under center, like you can ride a hot hand, whoever you feel like is running the ball the best that day. And they might need that if the offensive line's in transition. You might need a guy to get a bit more out of every carry because his line's not doing all the work. Now, those guys aren't used to that yet, but I think that's one part of the offense where, we're kind of negative so far, but like you got to love your running back room if you're heading into 2022. Maybe a guy transfers, but still, if you retain 2 of those 3, like you're in great shape. And if you retain all 3, I mean, gangbusters potentially in that part of the offense.
Yeah, Dominic Richardson, too, from Oklahoma State,
that's right.
over out of the portal. So now it's like, all right, sweet. I don't know if we really needed an extra running back.
Yeah, I don't get that. Right?
Yeah, he's good at football, so I'm not complaining. But if you're just loading up that room to be one of the more elite, at least the deepest in the Big 12, which that's something good. Last year, it's funny to me, Josh. Last year was like, all right, who's going to be the running back? I don't know. But the line's good. So put me back there. Let me carry the ball. As long as that offensive line is in front of you, you're going to be good. So these guys on the ground got a year with a really good offensive line who underperformed at times, but they were still a really good offensive line. So that experience now next year becomes, who's the offensive line? I don't know, but we got these guys running the football, so we should be okay. Thankfully, there's that transition in this program. And Richard Reese, as good as he was, I mean, he was a freshman, true freshman who nobody had heard of. Look, week 2, it's like, who's this Reese kid on the field and why? We need all these preseason who can make an impact out of the freshman class. He was on none of them. So the fact that he was that good, and Craig Williams steps into that role as well, Quaylon Jones, and now Richardson, you could see a really good run game from Baylor. Look, there are a lot of positives for this team. A couple portal receivers, portal offensive linemen, but that's the big thing. How do you rebuild this O-line? And also, you don't have a defensive coordinator. I've got questions, Josh, that have not been answered yet, and that kind of scares me.
So wide receivers, we touched on a little bit. I think like Monterey Baldwin's the guy I think we all look at and we're like, that's it right there. Like that guy has a chance to be the game breaker. And look, I think it's more of that building that relationship up with the quarterback. I think that's there. And who they get in the portal wide receiver? Who are we talking about here?
Got an Arkansas kid, which certainly makes yours truly happy. And he's a 4-star out of high school, played a little bit for the Hogs last year. I wish I remember.
Not a robust passing attack that the Hogs have. I mean,
no, it's KJ and Malik Hornsby might come to Baylor out of the portal. Did you see that?
I did see that, which is like, I feel like that kid wants to play, and I'm not sure. I mean, maybe he likes his chances with Blake Shapen.
But Ketron Jackson, Keyshawn Jackson coming to Baylor from Arkansas is great. You're right. Like, who threw him the ball there? KJ Jefferson Kennedy.
Let's do defense. So I thought there were moments this year where they kind of like they were able to push some teams around a little bit.
Texas Tech, 5 interceptions.
They completely pushed Texas Tech around. I mean, and they were controlling the game up front. And then you had games. OU had their way with them a little bit on the offensive side of things. And then also, the West Virginia game, I mean, complete disaster up front. Like West Virginia was getting whatever they wanted. And that you can't say that for West Virginia for most of their games this year, right? So what I feel like, to me, they need more playmakers in the linebacking spot and in the secondary. I think they need more guys that can make plays back there. And then their defensive line just needed to be a bit more consistent than it was, I thought.
This was supposed to be the greatest defensive line that's ever existed in the history of the world, and that just wasn't. That was the really weird part. I say really weird. Maybe the most weird part of this entire team to me was how ineffective the defensive line was at times this year. Even against Albany in the first game of the season, you're like, they're not getting as much of a push as I thought they would get. And that ended up being consistent the rest of the year. We got to like week 9. Somebody looked at me and goes, where's Jackson Player? And I had forgotten that he was on the team. He was supposed to be this marquee guy out of the portal. And you really didn't see him take that next step toward the end of the year. Siaki Ika's getting double teamed and felt like Gabe Hall had his points and Garmin Randolph.
So do we think Siaki Ika just had too much tension on him, or do we think he didn't play well?
Oh, yeah. I think
I've heard a little bit of both, and I'm not sure where I watching, there were times where I'm like, where is he? And there were some games actually where I thought he did step up a little bit.
Yeah, I would give you, it is a little bit of both. I'm not going to give him a full escape because you think that when you think those guys, like I wanted him to be this background or backfield just havoc wreaker, and you didn't get that. You really didn't. And even if he's being double teamed against Albany, you're like, all right, this is the game. He's going to eat somebody. He never ate anybody pretty much the entire year. So yeah, I think you should have asked a little bit more out of Siaki Ika, but when they've got 2 or 3 offensive linemen and a pulling guard that are all blocking him, I get why he wasn't as effective as maybe some Baylor fans expected.
So I will say this, like the defense wasn't horrible, but this wasn't a conference that was awesome at defense this year, and they were middle of the pack in this conference. Yeah. Where are we on the hiring of a defensive coordinator? Because this is obviously becomes an interesting one due to we saw Ron Roberts move on, Dave Aranda, obviously a defensive guy, such a really successful defensive guy at that as well. What is the latest buzz on where the Baylor Bears are hiring a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, it's not good. At the time of recording this, there's really the buzz is almost non-existent. It hurts my bones and my soul that we, in the press conference after the Air Force game, you knew that you're going to get like 10 questions from these reporters, Dave Aranda and Dylan Doyle, and that's it. He is reclusive. He is a groundhog. He will not take media again till spring football. Right. So you won't see Dave Aranda for 3 more months. And even after they hire a defensive coordinator, you still won't see Dave Aranda. So a lot of questions that have gone unanswered going into this offseason and will remain unanswered. That being one of them is, what's the timeline for a DC? Josh, it's December 27th as we're recording it right now at 11:50 Central Time. Ron Roberts was fired on December 1st. It has been 4 weeks since this process started, and Baylor wasn't preparing for a big bowl game. They had the Armed Forces Bowl on December 23rd. So I don't know how, especially with Jim Leonard in the mix from Wisconsin, who's brought so much buzz. There are a couple other coordinators from across the country who aren't still in bowl games. Like, unless he's going to pull something insane with one of these college football playoff teams, I don't know why it's taken 4 weeks, because you're losing so much in the portal by not getting somebody right now who can bring in guys that love him.
So, and yeah, it's almost like they were doing it as a reaction, just like that's what teams do when they don't play well. And I don't know if they necessarily needed to do it. I feel look, I saw some of your tweets during the year, like somebody's got to pay, somebody has to answer for it. I know that's how people feel, right? But was it the right, like, if you had no backup plan, like you don't have a backup plan, and maybe it's your fault for not having a backup plan, but like, I know Dave Aranda is going to put the time in and make what he believes to be the right hire. If he is anything, he is thorough, correct? I mean, that's kind of the guy that we know. But it is interesting because that is supposed to be this team's strength. I will say, like, I think they're in a position where they can get back to that. I also think they'll be under the radar next year. That's kind of a place that they can live. But it is curious to me that they didn't get on this faster.
It's interesting to me too, Josh. As crazy as the Big 12 was last year, like, oh, it's never been so wide open. Who's going to win the Big 12 next year?
Right. No.
I love the parity in this league, and you're adding 4 new teams that what are they going to do to this league?
Right.
They might just be a wrecking ball and take out a bunch of these, the hateful 8 that they call every team outside of Texas and Oklahoma. I don't know what this league's going to look like. So that makes me want even more stability with.
Well, I'll tell you the fans who are in mind, and I'm sure you're hearing from them too. The Texas Tech fans think they are going to have an 11-win season next year. They think it is their league, and they think they cannot be told differently. And look, I'm happy for them. They've had a fantastic year. But like, I think you made a great point. And here's the good thing about Tech. This year they're like a good measuring stick, right? They really didn't get blown out until they played Baylor and just got, tossed around
at home on Patrick Mahomes' day.
And how like they weren't ready for a big game against on Patrick Mahomes' day. My God, what's going to happen when you're ranked and Texas comes back to town, right? They already had to go to the road to Texas next year, right? Or they're going to Norman next year as well. Like, what happens? And they have to go to Baylor next year as well. What happens then? And I will tell you this. This kind of transitions us to like the outlook for next year. Baylor has one of the coaches that he's won a Big 12 championship. He has pedigree winning national championships as a coordinator. He has won a conference championship as a head coach. He has won a New Year's Six Bowl. He has, he's beaten teams that he's lost to early in the year. Like, kind of all the things that you want to check off the box. And I will say the one thing that we know he did really well from the 2-win season to the 10-win season, or was it a 10 wins? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The 10-win season was adjusting and like being very honest about what had to change. And, he is not the stick to my guns for the sake of sticking to my guns type guy. And I think that is very encouraging for Baylor fans. So do I know what the changes are right now? No, but I'll tell you this. They got an awesome offensive coordinator, Jeff Grimes, who's still there, right? Which is fantastic. Because people thought he'd get a head coaching job. Yeah. And they've got a really smart defensive mind at the coach. And I know they've lost some guys recruiting, get that in a second. But like, there is a world in which Baylor goes right back to the Big 12 championship game next year, and Blake Shapen takes a step, and the wide receivers look a year older, and the defense, is better. And it can't improve. As bad as it's been, it definitely can't improve. I thought TCU was going to win 5 games this year. I thought they were like 5 games this year because I didn't know what their identity would be. In year one, they're Sonny Dykes, and they're going.
My favorite part about the TCU going 11-1, 12-0, 12-0 college football or playoff and everything is that they at the beginning of the year they would clip people like you and me predicting their season, and by the end of the year they just stopped because they were like every analyst in America predicted that
their over under win total was like 5.5.
No one predicted them to be good. Like
this same group of players won 5 games last year where the coach was a Hall of Famer.
They're like so-called analyst thinks TCU is going to be bad. Like, yes, everyone did.
And everybody, it's funny because at the end of the year, people were saying like TCU was my favorite team. And I'm like, I guess you all just forgot what I said the first month of the season. It's, I'll tell you what though, I want to ask you about this. Like the loss of Austin Novosad, that because the transition of the Baylor quarterback situation, like they needed that guy in there. And look, the recruiting class is still pretty decent, but that getting a player like that after a season that Baylor had still signifies that, look, we can still, even on a down year for us, we're a year removed from a Big 12 title, we can still kill it recruiting wise. Everybody says it's always the next class. And I don't know if that's always true because so much happens between last year and now. I mean, it's a year away from the Big 12 championship to the following signing day, right? Baylor's Big 12 championship as we sit right now, and signing day just happened. That's over a calendar year ago. Yeah. So talk about this recruiting class and what it means to lose Austin Novosad, because I know you talked to him. I know you were able to get a chance to get to know him a little bit, and also just kind of the choice and what happened there.
It's the best recruiting class Dave Aranda has had, and it was on track to be a top 20 recruiting class when you had Brathwaite and Torian York, and you had Austin Novosad, and now you don't have any of those guys. Those were kind of some of your marquee dudes in this class, and they all jumped ship and went to Texas A&M and Oregon. And the weirdest part to me is the relationship that I got to build with Novosad there late in the game, and how I thought, like, all right, sweet, this kid feels like genuine and has this loyalty to Baylor. And look, I don't want to say that he's not genuine or doesn't have got a dog in the background. Don't want to say he's not genuine or doesn't have a loyalty. But when someone waves $1 million+ in your face or whatever Nike and Oregon wanted to throw at him, like, look, it's tough not to balk at that. And I don't know the kid's financial situation, but that's something you take into account. So I'm not one of these keyboard fans. It's like, oh, I'm so mad. There are things that Baylor is not equipped for that will keep them in, that will keep them losing these recruits. NIL being one of the big ones. They are just behind the punch in NIL compared to a lot of these big major programs.
Well, compared to Oregon.
Yes. And really compared to, look, and you can say the same about Iowa State. And you can say the same about a lot of these Big 12 schools that just haven't met the SEC, Big 10, or even Pac-12 caliber of NIL. Baylor being one of them. This is going to be a trend moving forward. And it sucks, but it's the new age of college football. And if Dante Moore takes 48 hours to decide to go to UCLA, Austin Novosad's at Baylor. That was the catalyst. Dante Moore decides to go to UCLA 48 hours before signing day, and that's when Oregon said, we have to have Austin Novosad. Give him the bag, give him whatever, we'll take him.
Well, and this is an important point here that you bring up with all this stuff. And I think that oftentimes, like, we separate these conversations. I think this is a really good place to have it all together. The reason why on this Big 12 channel I've been talking about if the Big 12 had the ability to add an Oregon and a Washington, if the Pac-12 fell apart, they should, is because of this. Like, this school, when you think about Nike in college football, what do you think of? It's Oregon, right? You're not thinking about anybody else. It is Oregon. And from what we've been hearing, Phil Knight, the goal now is to get that man a football or basketball, but both maybe, a championship before he moves on. He's not a young guy, right? And we hope Phil Knight lives to be 150, but like, he is in his 80s now. And so that is something that I think is factoring. But like, those schools have that kind of money to throw around, to toss around, because they're big brands and they have big backing. And like, as much as I hate to say it, and you just admitted as well, some of our institutions that we have can't throw their weight around like that. And the NIL era, it sucks because, as soon as one of our schools gets a kid like that, one transition from one, Dante Moore, right? You mentioned him. That means that a kid who could have been a star in this league for years to come, we've just lost out on him because of these other massive powers with the spending money that they have. And look, this is not me trying to diminish the league at all. It's just a reality of the situation. And, Baylor's going to punish for it, but that's why these schools, and look, these schools have always had this. They've always had to develop talent, right? They've always had to make it work. Like Baylor has won without Austin Novosad before. Yeah. They can do it after, I guess would be my not positive spin, but like, look, it's not the end of the world. As much as getting him would signify, where this program is, you can still win without him, although we'd love to have him.
Yeah, there was a staff member I heard from kind of under the table that will remain anonymous, of course, that said pretty much the same thing was, look, if Austin Novosad doesn't want to come here, we don't want Austin Novosad. Why would we have wanted a guy who teeter in, teeter out? Do I want to be there? Do I not? What's the point of that? Maybe he would have been great for us. Maybe he would have been in the portal.
That's why.
Maybe he would have been in a portal in 2 years, Right. So at the end of the day, we are a Baylor program that wants kids that want us. That has always been the message. We want Jalen Petries. Jalen Petrie wouldn't have taken the back from Oregon. Austin Novosad's not Jalen Petrie. See you later. And I know it sounds like the guy that got broken up with. It's like, oh no, it was mutual. But that at least is a good perspective, a positive, healthy perspective to think, okay, if the kid didn't want us, that's great. Have a fun time in Oregon. We want guys that want us.
Well, I think he did. I think just in the end of the day, though, it's probably, the amount of money that a Nike bag.
That was stupid.
Yeah, it's got to be a stupid amount of money. And look, that's like the going rate for these kids, right? And you want to have a plan. That's what NIL has done now, kind of the situation. Let's talk about the transfer portal real quickly before we get out of here. What else besides receiver? Where is Baylor going hunting? And I will say this too. I feel like same thing with recruiting applies to transfer portal. When you go play for Dave Aranda, and I've always said this, I feel like if you are a parent and he comes into your house, and I know all the head coaches isn't always doing all the recruiting, but they do a good amount of it. There is a certain level of sincerity where it's like, and we don't know these people. I know there's coaches who've done bad stuff, so whatever. But he seems like an incredibly sincere person.
Yeah. Who's
very thoughtful. And if I was a father or mother, I could trust my kid sending them to play for this awesome coach. So I feel like they are after a certain type of kid. So is that what you're hearing too? Is that the approach in the portal? Same with the recruiting. Like, we want kids who want us. We want a certain type of young man. So I know everybody says this, but with Dave Aranda, it actually does feel real.
Yeah, they want culture, period. That's why I hired Jeff Grimes, is they want culture. That's why I fired Ron Roberts, because they want culture. That's why I fired Larry Fedora. Dave Aranda you're right. He's going to leave people on the cutting room floor who don't fit the culture. That applies to players as well. So in the portal, it's not, we have a 5-star athlete who wants to come here. If he's not a culture fit, we're not going to take him, because he'd probably be in the portal a year from now anyway. He wouldn't fit. So there are layers and levels to that. It puts you behind the punch in a lot of areas. It really does, because you're losing out on some great athletes that you don't think are going to be fits. and you're also looking at kids that could be great projects that you're maybe not getting, and you're behind the punch in that Dave Aranda said he's going to go after a quarterback in January. Josh, the portal opened up almost a month ago. Why are you waiting till January to get a quarterback? That's what he's doing to follow through with what his culture is. Do I always think it's the most progressive and active way to do this to build the best football team? No, because it's not. But in the long run, if you want to build stability, consistency, no more ins and outs and ups and downs and hills and valleys, this is the way to do it. So I'm going to sit here, my thumb in my mouth, and be happy in 5 years when Baylor feels like one of the stronger programs in the Big 12, because I do see that as being the trajectory under Dave Aranda.
And I agree with that. I think that's kind of the upshot of all this. Like, they are in Texas, advantage.
Yeah.
It is a smaller private school, but there is still a lot of money there. They play in a beautiful stadium, and I think the rest of the facilities are pretty good too, right?
I think they're building a whole new indoor football facility too,
right?
So
they have a coach that he is not Shane Beamer, right? He is not Brent Venables.
Yeah.
He is more towards, I'd say, Sonny Dykes in like the demeanor department, right? Sonny is a bit more laid back, chill, cool. Dave is more of like just a quieter guy. Is that, do you think that's fair? And look, like, it's still a 6-win season. And I said the same thing with Oklahoma State. You said it first. You said it here. Disaster was the word you used. If 6-7 is a disaster,
you're in a fine spot.
You're in an okay spot. All right. I said the same thing about Oklahoma State. I said, look, 7-5, 8-5 is 7-6, 8-5 is they end up. We'll see what happens tonight, and you all would know what happens after this. But like that was a bad season, regardless of what happens. Pretty good spot, right? Pretty good spot if that's the case.
Yeah.
I still feel very good. Baylor and TCU, they are rivals. They do feel very much alike about like what their positioning is. And look, I like their footholds. We know they can win at a high level in this league. Here's the thing. Iowa State, we know they can, but like, they haven't come. They feel like a little along the way. West Virginia. Do we know if West Virginia can win a Big 12 championship? No,
I don't.
No, we've got no clue. UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU. We've got no clue, right? There is this group of teams that we have got no clue if they can win. Baylor is not one of them. Also, on the conservative point you made, it came back to bite them in that TCU game. God, that play calling was bad there. That was old Dave. That was 2-win Dave. Dave, what? I mean, that was bad.
That was Larry Fedora Dave is what it was.
That was Larry Fedora Dave being like, we got to punt our own, on their 35-yard line. It was a nightmare. But
yeah,
do you agree with that? Do you feel like, you know what? We know we can win a Big 12 title regardless. OU, Texas, be damned. We know we can beat these other teams.
To close, I think it's the best way to close it is Baylor a year ago was a game away from what TCU is now. I think it's a great comp. They are right on that same path with TCU, which I think is a great thing for the league. Baylor fans probably disagree. It's like, oh, I hate TCU. That's how Baylor fans sound. But it's a great thing for the league that Baylor and TCU have been playoff caliber squads, Oklahoma State included in the last couple of seasons. None of those three are Oklahoma or Texas, and they all have some sort of supposed stability moving forward, which is going to be awesome.
All right. We appreciate your time, Mr. Toll. Where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
At Locked On Baylor on Twitter, at Drake C. Toll on Twitter. It always is Twitter. Always has been, always will be. This whole world is Twitter. Hope. So, yeah, hopefully it sticks around a little bit. It's my entire personality. So if it doesn't, we've got big problems. So follow us there and all the shows daily and wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube.
I want to say I always enjoy seeing your calls from your the Panthers, China Spring Panthers.
Cougars, close.
Cougars.
Yeah.
Congrats to your state championship and did a great job with that. So I want to tell you also, good job there. You guys can find me on Twitter at JoshNeighbors_. Find the show at LOBig12. Find us wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Drake, we're talking to you very soon. Thanks, man.
Good job.